So hi, good morning to everyone. I am Haley Tompkins. I'm the branch manager of the Crozet Library. We are here today to learn about empathy in this third session of Parenting with Neuroscience by Dr. Erin Claybaugh. Dr. Claybaugh is a neuroscientist. She's a professor and an author of Second Nature, How Parents Can Use Neuroscience to Help Kids Develop Empathy, Creativity, and Self-Control. We will continue this series on Friday, July 10th at 10 a.m. and we'll talk about self-control in that session. This session will be recorded and available on the JMRL YouTube channel, and I will email out the link to everyone so that you guys can access it at any time and share it with any of your friends that you think it would be helpful for. If you do have a question, you can type it in the Q&A below, and Dr. Claybaugh will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Erin. We're really excited to get started today.
Thanks, Haley. Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to talk about empathy today because I feel like this is something that if we didn't normally think about, we've thought about a lot in the last couple of months. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I want to walk through with you guys. So I think, perfect. So this particular series of parenting messages really goes around three basic principles, that there are three skills that are all interconnected that can help us be better parents and do it using the platform of neuroscience. So the empathy is one of these three pillars. And the reason that this book was written was because I was trying to figure out if I was doing my best job that I could possibly do. And I'm sure all you guys think about that, maybe not day to day, right, when we're in the thick of it, but sometimes we have these moments where we're like, you know, they just did this and I was feeling this and I just don't know, am I like heading in the right direction? Am I focusing on the right things? And we were doing a lot of, you know, when my kids are 2, we were doing multiplication like signs and like shapes of triangles versus squares. And I started to feel like my efforts were being put into these things that maybe weren't that important in terms of life skills. So my kids now, I have 4 and they are 9 to 16. And so this journey has been one, you know, of a decade and a half. And it's been really putting together what I do in the lab, which was basic neuroscience. So looking at neurons in a dish and animal models and behavioral assays and genes, and trying to figure out how does this translate to the neuroscience that I know is happening in my kids' brains every day in reaction to me and all by themselves, just neurodevelopment. So the skills that these three pillars are empathy, which we're going to talk about a lot today, creativity, and self-control. And they all go together and boost each other. And a lot of people will call these different things. So all of these that you might see as kind of keywords that you want to foster in your children, they all are components of these three pillars. So in terms of if empathy is important, it really matters how we as parents define empathy. Because if we think of it as a strength, as something that you want to raise a child who can really see things from someone else's point of view and is compassionate, then parents are going to want to devote a lot of time to fostering that. If they know that empathy is going to make kids happier, if they know that it's going to make better friendships. But there's an equal amount of people, I think, that think of empathy as a sort of weakness. And this means, you know, in a competitive atmosphere, you don't want somebody who's perceived as not strong, so they let someone else win. Or you think about somebody being beat up in the hallway and they're kind of a weakling, and the last thing you need for that bullied kid to have is empathy. Instead, you want to build them up and make them stronger. But I would say that when parents think one way or the other about this, it's too black and white, because there are a lot of different kinds of empathy. And I think that some kids do come into this world kind of with more of one kind of empathy than another. And it becomes part of their coping strategy in this world. And so what I'm going to say today is that if parents understand the different sorts of empathy, there's 3 kinds of empathy, and a little bit more about how they work and how we can cultivate them, then that will give them the opportunity to boost their kids up in one of the ones that they don't have. And that in turn will balance out the ones that they maybe do have. So this idea of if it's important, I really like this quote. It made me think a lot when I first found it. So one doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. So I think this is really relevant right now with all of the kind of awareness that everyone in our country has right now about racial issues. So this idea that kind of just seeing it from someone else's point of view can kind of start us on the process, but it's not really enough to just see it from someone else's point of view. We have to deal with the emotional content of this, and we have to deal with the self-awareness, and we have to deal with the idea that maybe the world that we constructed for ourselves in terms of what is right and what is wrong and what is normal, what is not, is maybe skewed. And that's really, really hard to do. So let me kind of go a little bit further into this empathy. So even if you feel like, you know, we have enough kind of compassion and we're comfortable with where we are in life, let me just give you some of the stuff from the literature that says empathy, when you train people in empathy, you end up with kids that have higher GPAs, better reading comprehension, more developed critical thinking skills. You also, in these empathy training environments, there's been studies that show that it leads to a greater sense of well-being. It can lead to feeling more rich. So in terms of if you give something away, for example, there was a study that showed that toddlers were given a choice if they wanted to give some of their goldfish crackers to the researcher or just keep them for themselves and things like this. In these situations, the people who are giving money away, if they're if they got a $20 bill and they were told, you know, to give it away or keep it for themselves over the course of a day, the ones that gave it away, they had the perception of being richer than the ones who kept it. So they are rich or feel more rich because they have this perception that their time is their own. And then going forward with the next like myriad of things, they're more successful in relationships. They make better bosses because they're able to really understand what their team is going through underneath them. They actually, higher empathy levels have been correlated to increased wound healing rates and kind of protection from some sorts of sicknesses. In addition, doctors who have empathy training actually have improved patient outcomes. So they're better doctors because they're able to empathize with their patients. So there's a ton of things going on in the like real world as well as in the classroom with empathy training. So when we focus on empathy, I'm going to introduce the 3 kinds of empathy that we have here. So emotional empathy is the first kind of empathy. And this, as it sounds like, focuses really on the emotions that you feel inside as a person. And then the second one is cognitive empathy. And as that looks like, the cognitive part of it is thinking about the empathetic process. This is a great way for you guys to kind of see the difference between cognitive and emotional empathy. So one of the best ways to train these sorts of things and to understand these sorts of things is to look at the way that researchers measure them. So this is a empathy measurement that you can give to kids or to adults. And it basically is a bunch of statements that you agree with, strongly disagree with, strongly agree with on a Likert scale. And it's called the Interpersonal Reactivity Index. And it really is a whole bunch of these questions that are divided into 2 buckets. One bucket is this purple one here. The first 2, they're measuring emotional empathy. And then the second bucket is this kind of blue one. This is measuring cognitive empathy. And so these are some examples of things that you would strongly agree with if you were very emotionally empathetic. When I see someone being taken advantage of, I feel kind of protective towards them. Or another one, personal distress. In emergency situations, I feel apprehensive and ill at ease. Both those statements are measuring how much emotional empathy you naturally have. So the blue ones, the examples for cognitive empathy, I really get involved with the feelings of characters in a novel. So if you strongly agree with that, then you might have high levels of cognitive empathy. Another one would be, when I am upset at someone, I usually try to put myself in his shoes for a while. So really, after you go through these, 30 or 40 statements and you agree or disagree, they come up with this kind of measurement of these two things. And it is certainly possible for someone to be very high with natural emotional empathy and very low in cognitive empathy, or different. Okay. The third kind of empathy is what I call applied empathy. So this is really empathetic acts, and this is what society kind of terms compassion. So this is not just thinking about or feeling these empathetic thoughts, but doing something about them to actually relieve the suffering of someone else in some way. All right, so I want to make a point here that I think most parents want to get their kids to the end, this compassionate act. All right. And I think that the idea that empathy is a weakness can come in sometimes if you have a lot of cognitive empathy or a lot of emotional empathy. And in some ways that freezes you so that you're not able to make it to that compassionate act. And then you sit with that and you feel that, or you think that, and you're stuck there. Okay, so this flowchart basically has three components of empathy. There's the feeling part, there's the thinking part, and there's the acting part. And so if you have no empathy at all, like this kind of the middle row, if you have no feeling, no thinking, no action, then obviously nothing is happening. Okay, you're not engaging with the situation at all. The opposite of that would be if you had empathy in every realm. So if you have a feeling inside you, if you can think about the situation, and then you do something about it. This is kind of tapping into all of these stepwise. But it's really important to understand that you don't have to tap into all of these stepwise. So you can get to applied empathy through either feeling emotions or thinking about it. You don't have to do both. And these are actually really separate processes. So cognitive and emotional empathies, like these processes use different brain areas. So the one over on the left is cognitive, and these are areas really in the frontal cortex that are lighting up. They're activated when somebody is involved in a perspective taking exercise or a cognitive empathy exercise. And over on the right, this is emotional empathy, and you can see this is scattered throughout the brain in different areas. So the one that's yellow down at the bottom is called the insula. And the insula is where we receive all this gut impulses coming in. When you feel an emotion, you feel it in your gut, right? And so this is where this starts to be processed. And then you can see these four areas are not the same in any way as to the three areas over on the other side. So they're really, really separate. For emotional empathy then, if you have emotional empathy, this means you feel your own emotion of sadness very strongly at somebody else's situation. There's three things that can happen. So we're going to say this child here feels really bad because something happened on the playground to a friend. Okay, the first one is emotional empathy that then you can't think your way through it and you don't do anything about it. So this outcome is going to be, you have a lot of empathy in this situation, you're going to be frozen. You can't do anything about it. And this, I think, is what society thinks of as we think of it as a weakness. They're too emotionally empathetic. They can't process it. They're just overwhelmed by their own sadness. The second row is where you have emotional empathy and you can think through it. So you have cognitive empathy at all, but then you don't do anything about it. So in this situation, you can think through, you can feel it, but then the outcome is still nothing in terms of it, you don't do anything to relieve your own anxiety or suffering, and you don't do anything to relieve the other person's. So this last one, I think, is the most interesting one here. This is where you have emotional empathy, and that just spurs you to do something. So you skip over this thought process altogether. And this is these empathetic people that are moved to just hug when someone's crying, or they, unconsciously are reaching into their wallet to get a $5 bill out to give to somebody who's in need. Okay, you don't have to go through thinking in order to have compassion. You can take that emotional empathy, funnel it into an act, and you know what? That act is going to relieve that for you. It's going to make you feel better. All right, so let's talk about the cognitive one. So you can see for feeling, you never have any feeling here. So this is somebody that is not emotionally empathetic at all. They are a very cerebral person. They think through things. Their emotions might be hard for them to tap into. That does not mean that they are not able to be a compassionate person and to have compassionate acts. So the first one here, you really skip over this feeling and then you start at the cognitive empathy. And then you can think through it enough, right? But then even though you understand that this situation might be hard for somebody, you don't do anything about it. And in this situation, it doesn't really matter how much cognitive empathy you have because there's no move or to help. You don't do anything to make it better. So you're kind of stuck in your own thoughts here. The one on the bottom has the cognitive empathy happening in the absence of feeling, and then it has you acting. So in this situation, just thinking about somebody else's experience and thinking about what they might need to make that better is enough to pop them into some kind of a compassionate act. Okay, so you can see here that you start at emotions, you start at cognition. Either one, you can get to the compassionate acts. And I think that's really important for us as parents because we have kids that just come into this world being emotionally empathetic, or they might come into this world being cognitively empathetic. And both of those situations, it's easy enough to be able to teach how to funnel that into a compassionate act. So these three pillars then, the empathy really gets tied in with the creativity and the self-control here, because the idea generation and the being able to withhold your own first response and do something that's good for somebody else, these things are all tied together. And it's interesting that these are probably the hardest things to teach, but they're the most important. And the reason that we feel like they're the hardest things to teach is because you can't force them. Like you can't make someone be empathetic towards somebody else. You can't make someone be creative, and you can't make someone have control over their own self. So we're left as parents in a situation where we literally are just going to be putting these kinds of experiences in front of our kids and asking them to do the work themselves. They are all tied together through self-regulation. So if you're able to have empathy, creativity, and self-control, you're able to move towards your own goals, wants, needs, but not at the expense of somebody else's wants, goals, and needs. This is where you are kind of good self-regulation. All right, so empathy then, teachable skill. Same way that we would teach an instrument or teach a sport, it's really a practice event. And in terms of the types of empathy, cognitive empathy, research has shown that it is easier to teach cognitive empathy than it's to teach emotional empathy. And the reason for this is because you can't really make an emotion generate in somebody else. Okay, but you can teach a thought process. And so if you have a child who's really not that emotionally empathetic, you would focus on teaching them this cognitive empathy. And if you have somebody who already is emotionally empathetic, you would want to teach them skills to be able to process what they're feeling, name it, and then funnel it into either a cognitive framework so they understand it, or empathetic acts. Okay, so we need to now talk about neuroscience, which is my favorite thing to talk about. We have this myth floating around out there that we use 10% of our brains. I want to just say that this is not true. We use every neuron in our brain. Like every single one is important and has a role, and it's active at some point. So they're not all active at the same time, but they're all, healthy and functioning and ready to make different connections at any given time, at any day, right? And so thinking about this, I want to talk about this kind of box at the bottom. This has the three main brain development steps that everybody goes through. So you can see that all of gestation, all of pregnancy is just spent making neurons and then having them move to where they need to be in the adult brain. And then kind of midway through pregnancy, going up until maybe age 10 or so, you're going to have this giant period of synaptogenesis. So this is the connections between the neurons. They're going to be forming at an astronomical rate. So we're going to make many, many, many more synapses connections between neurons than we have as an adult. So when our kids are little, they have too many synapses. And as they grow up, as they become more of who they are, as they learn how to function in this world, the ones that they need, they're using, and so they'll keep them. And the ones that they are not using will fade away. And those neurons will end up, if the whole neuron's not being used, it'll be pruned away. The synapses, if the synaptic connection isn't forming, they won't keep it. They won't like have a neuron that they keep around if they're not going to use it. And so if you just look at like a graph, when a baby's born, it has a ton of neurons, it has a ton of synapses. And then as it starts to develop through childhood, it tapers off. Okay, and so this is what, you know, you think of your kid and they become more like of their personality or more of who they are. That's the process that we're looking at here. Okay, so this last one here I want to show you is myelination. So this is the blue one. Myelination is something that's happening that speeds things up. So this picture of a neuron has a myelinated axon. So it basically means that the axon, which is the connection point between one neuron and another that sends a signal, is sped up by wrapping an insulation around it. So myelin is the name of the insulation. And when you use a brain pathway repeatedly, not only does the synapse, so the connection between one neuron and the next neuron right there, get stronger, but it's more likely to become myelinated. So the myelin thickness, so how fast it goes, gets higher in active brain circuits that you're using. And this is a practice effect that no one really talks about, but it's important when we're talking about how to cultivate empathy in our kids. We want their kind of pathways that they use in this empathetic process, in the perspective taking, to be the ones that they default to. And the neuroscience has shown us that pathways that are used even one time are more likely to be used in the future because of this exact thing that I'm talking about here. And there's not some like 0 to 3 years old magic critical window or 0 to 5 where this is happening. If you look at this graph down here, your critical window is giant. So really synaptogenesis, and we still are undergoing synaptogenesis. You just listening to me, you're making synapses and you're weakening ones that you're not using right now. So this brain development window is much bigger than most people realize. And in myelination, we're still myelinating particularly things in our cortex in the front up until we're in our 30s. And so the opportunity for parents to ask kids to do things or place experiences in their way that make them exercise these things that we know will help them be more empathetic. It's going to work at a lot of different time points, not just in the preschool years. So this is a movie that I took in my lab of it's a brain section. So, and this is a mouse brain, but the neurons are exactly the same in a mouse as they are in a human. And I'm just going to basically like go through this slice of brain, and you can see as we focus in on, we'll see the processes, and then we'll see the cell body, and then we'll kind of go through. And what I want you to see are these little tiny things. It's going to look a little bit like a spider actually, but on these projections, these are called dendrites, and they're where the neuron receives information. And so on each of these branches that look a little bit like legs, you see little tiny things called spines on them. And these spines are really where the synapses occur. So let me push play here, and you can see those nubby bits that are hanging off of these dendrites, and then the cell body you can see really large right there. These spines are actually the active sites of where this neuron is receiving connection from another neuron. And these spines can come and go. They're very motile, and they're responsive to experience. So you hear about this nature nurture. Nature sets you up to have this neuron, and then the way that the neuron's going to work is going to be responsive to nurture. So it's going to be responsive to the experiences that this neuron has. And this neuron's going to be able to remember the experiences that it has in a way that actually will change its neural architecture. So this idea is the synaptic plasticity. And I like to kind of have this slide again, because this slide is such a beautiful like depiction of how activity makes us lose synapses or gain synapses. And so you can see here that if you have two synapses that are side by side and one gets used, So it gets input coming in from another neuron in the form of this lightning bolt, because it'll be electrical impulse that comes down. It will get stronger, and eventually the body's going to give more resources and support that synapse. It will be more robust, and eventually it might turn into 2 synapses just to support that one pathway, because now you're using it all the time. And so when we start to put empathetic experiences where in our kids' actually day-to-day life, this is what's happening on a neuroscientific level at the level of a cell, right? And the molecules here. So like parents are doing molecular neuroscience every day as we parent our kids. All right, so how do we do this? So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is, as parents, what do we notice? So in your day with your child, as you go through, the things that you call out in the world around you, the things that you decide to kind of pay attention to, is also what your child's going to pay attention to. Okay, so when you have a situation where kids are involved, start by just noticing what feels good, what feels off. What emotions do you notice in this particular situation? Does your kid kind of fall off and have a little quiet moment? What does that mean, right? So what we notice is really important about social interactions. Just being aware that this stuff is always going on and calling kind of attention to it in your day-to-day like parenting practice is the first step to think about getting empathy in our lives on a daily basis. All right, so here's what I mean by this being aware. So one of the other tests that is commonly used for empathy, and a lot of these were developed for autism spectrum disorders, but this one's called the reading the mind and the eyes test. And what they do is they basically cut out just eyes and they include the eyebrows, and that's all you get. And then the test gives you 4 emotional states, and they ask you to define which one it is. So these are not easy. And if you want to take this, I think that the New York Times about 5 years ago had an article on it that had a link that you could take it. And the HuffPost UK, I think, is another one that has it. There's actually a study you could participate in if you wanted to. So if you look at her eyes, is she surprised, joking, happy, or sure about something? And so actually, I did not look up the correct answers to these for these particular ones. I think I would say sure about something, but I don't know. All right, here is another one: playful, comforting, irritated, or bored. All right, so you're going to be giving both male and female, and you're going to be giving, what we think of as positive and negative emotions. And they also have a version of this that's designed just for kids. Okay, so as parents, then what do we talk about? So it's one thing if we notice something, we are aware, we're paying attention. It's another thing if we decide to have a conversation about it. And these conversations, I'm learning through parenting that the conversations that I don't want to have are the ones I need to lean into. So I'm not super comfortable talking about emotions, and this has been work for me to be able to do this. We need, as parents, to focus on feelings, perhaps more than we do, so that they're a daily conversation piece. Focus on our feelings, focus on their feelings. If that feels like not someplace you want to go yet, start by focusing on feelings that you see in TV shows. When you pause a movie to go get popcorn, talk about, oh, how do you think that Nemo feels? He's separated from his father, right? So there's opportunities absolutely everywhere. So you can just drive down the street probably and see some sort of small conflict, and talking about these conflicts, giving them a structure so that they're not like amorphous mass for our kids, helps them to be able to work through their own conflicts, like sorting out strategies. So this focus on feelings is really important. Which brings me to this question: what is an emotion? All right, so there is, I guess, technically an answer to this, but things that I have kind of heard in the past are it is maybe one of these 7 universal things. So there are universal emotions: disgust, joy, fear. These things have typical facial features associated with them that span cultures. So no matter where you were born, you probably still see happy face as a happy face. But that actually is not really a definition of what the emotion is. It's just like, what does your face look like when you are having that emotion? Or how do you recognize it? So you might say that an emotion is something that comes from your gut. And I would say that that is true, that gut feelings associated with emotions is one of the ways that we know that we're experiencing emotion, and that sometimes that can alter our behavior. It can tinge the way that we look at the world, our perspective, how we spend our time, what we think about. But that too is not really a complete definition, because hunger then, or thirst, those things could be emotions if you consider it that way, because I certainly feel hunger feeling in my gut, and it can certainly make me hangry, right? And so that can't be all that there is to an emotion. So the last kind of element of this definition I'm going to put in is it would be a gut feeling. It has the capability to color your behavior, but the last element would be that it adds value to our lives. So it might add value in a positive way or in a negative way. But what's really important about emotions is that when we have an emotional experience and that tinges our memory of something, we remember these highly emotional things more than just regular experiences that we have. They're seared sometimes into our memories. And it really is helpful for us as humans to be able to make decisions. So when you're allowed to have your emotion and you're in your emotion in a situation, you will remember it more as a positive or a negative experience. And this will change the way that you feel about it in the future. So it has the capability to take a completely benign event and to shift it towards a reward or towards something that you want to avoid in the future. So if there's like a parking space that you see all the time and you are really late for a doctor's appointment, it happens to be right there and that parking space is open, that emotion that you feel, relief, joy, that is actually going to make that parking lot, that parking space seem like a positive thing. And it'll be associated then in the future with that positive thing. If then, you didn't notice that you had to actually pay the meter and you went into your doctor's appointment, you come out and you got a ticket, all of a sudden this same parking spot is now associated with a really negative set of emotions. All right. And so the ability for us to have both positive and negative experiences about the world takes regular neutral content and shifts it into a way that we actually can make decisions better in the future based on that information. We remember it more. Okay, so this is something that's up on my fridge right now, I am trying to get these words into our household more, because I don't just generally talk in feeling words and feeling emotions. So what we're doing is it's on there, and then we have a like a magnet marble that I ask kids to put the magnet over the little emoji that is like they're feeling right now. And if it's not there, they are able to draw a little emoji for the one that they want. This has been such a better exercise than I thought. I put it up as kind of not a joke, but like I didn't know that we would actually use it. But the amount of conversations that we've had about this, for example, there's one on here called eavesdropping. It's like over on the right, in the second column down right in the middle. And my son was like, eavesdropping isn't an emotion. Why is that on here? And I'm like, you know what? I don't think it is an emotion. I don't know why it's on here. And some other ones, they were like, how is mad not on there? So, and this also helps us to expand our feeling vocabulary. And so, if you're asking your kid, how they feel and they say good or they feel bad, I'm like, those aren't emotions, pick from a list. And then if they say sad or if they say glad, we can probably do better. So maybe that's the reason that mad isn't on the list, because emotions are not black and white. You can see they're like a complete rainbow here. So this is just some food for thought. All right, so the way that we can get these experiences to our kids through our daily life is by what's known as scaffolding experience. So this 1 minute is going to be super sciencey, but this is where this idea scaffold comes from. So you might know about, a scaffold you put around a building when you're building the building, because it helps you kind of get to the hard to reach places. in science, a scaffolding protein is a protein that sits there inside a cell, and it acts as like the mothership, basically. It's like a dock. It's a giant protein, and it allows other things that do stuff in the cell to come and to dock on it and to do things. So it allows space for for proteins to come and do their jobs. And so as parents, our role really primarily is to scaffold childhood, to scaffold life for our kids until they're able to do it themselves. And so this is what kind of scaffolding proteins look like. In parenting land, what it means is it's our job to teach, to make aware, to bring into focus, to show them how to do it, and then to step back. And to do this when they're little, multiple times a day, right? So you need to teach and then step back. And don't step back for long. Be ready to kind of come in. And as they get older, you want to step back and stay back further, right? And eventually the goal is to have your kid already got taught, and then you're stepping back and you're providing support from far away so that they're able to independently experience these things. So I have a couple of frameworks that use acronyms, because acronyms are really, they're nice because they allow us to actually remember things sometimes. So when you have a situation where somebody is in a conflict situation and they're the ones that are primarily responsible for the conflict, so they're the ones that did something wrong, this structure called OUT is allowing them to make things right. And you will see here very clearly, it does not say I'm sorry, because the research shows, and my actual like boots on the ground experience with parenting shows, that sorry doesn't help at all. I mean, in the research, there's some things that say that sorry can be like a beginning, opening, but really the making it right, the restitution, the doing things differently, that's what's better in terms of the victim and forgiveness on the victim side. So for the perpetrator, right, this is what we do in my house. So you own the action, that's the O. So you have to say what you did. It's really hard to be accountable and make the other person feel better if you're still maintaining that it wasn't your fault, right? So own the action. Then the second one is understand how it affects people. So this is this empathetic perspective taking process. So if you kind of blew through somebody's room and jumped off the bed chasing somebody and landed on someone's laundry hamper and cracked it, all right, you would say what you did, not saying it wasn't my fault, she was chasing me, right, this kind of stuff. So you broke the laundry hamper. You understand how it affects people. So now, you know, this person might have to have a beat up laundry hamper. Maybe it can't be glued. Maybe it made a sharp piece and someone cut themselves on it. Maybe now we can't have nice things. Like, so understand how it affects other people. And then the last one, tell how you'll do it differently next time. So in the case of an accident, this might not be as relevant, but in the case of something that you did that was purposeful, or your child did that was a purposeful thing, this is really important, because it allows you to intellectually go down that path, right? In your kind of experience, you didn't do this, but in your future experience, you could. And there is a lot of data that says that basically if you think through an exit, you can more quickly move through that exit next time. So if you want them to do it differently, it's good to have them visualize how they would do it. So they would say, oh, I could do this, or I could do it that way. And this is a creative exercise as well. Okay, so without framework, this is what they actually might say. I licked your peach when you weren't looking. You can tell I'm a real parent here because these things happen all the time. Understand how it affects people. So you were probably mad and then you had to go wash off your peach. So this taps into how the emotions of the other person would come into play, and then also what they had to do to kind of make up for the behavior in terms of that it made more work for someone else. And then how you'll do it differently next time. I won't lick your peach again. So if there is an underlying issue why they licked the peach, then they should maybe have a conversation about how they would handle that underlying conflict. This then ends up working with bigger things too, like on the playground. So if you own the action, this is asking kids to take ownership and accountability for their own stuff. So if there's a conflict on the playground and somebody got into a fight with one of their friends, if they own the action, so I walked away from the swing set when Connor tried to take the swing for you. Like, this person is devastated because Connor did something and then their friend didn't stand up for them. So they can say, this is what I did. And then this second, understand how it affects people. You probably felt really sad and lonely. All right, so this opportunity to put themselves in someone else's shoes and to kind of reflect on it. And then this last one taps into creativity, pre-planning, the ability to have self-control, and just the mental control as a first step to self-control is really important. So I won't walk away when someone's being mean to you again. I'll tell them that's not okay. So this seems kind of a lot, this structure, but once you start using it, it'll be something that you don't need to prompt anymore. So you can say, what'd you do? How did it affect people? How are you gonna do it different? And eventually kids can just do this on their own because they know it's kind of like this conflict resolution strategy is a ticket to be able to kind of re-enter the kind of community of the family, because it's not good for there to be conflict and to have a kid get sent to their room or do timeout and then to re-enter without really talking through what happened. So this helps these hard conversations to be able to be had. All right, so that's if somebody is being kind of the perpetrator. What about if somebody is being the person who is being bullied? All right, so there are resources for that. It's really, really important to teach cognitive empathy to children or adults who are being bullied, because allowing them to have some perspective for the bully, to see commonalities, to be able to see how they're the same as you and what you have in common, gives the bullied person a sense of control. And the sense of control flips the power dynamic so that they have understanding in this situation. The situation may still really stink, but it gives them the ability to kind of hold their own in a way emotionally and mentally that maybe they weren't able to do in the beginning. So the support for the bullied acronym is STAFF. So the first one is say how you feel. So, hey, that hurt my feelings. T is tell them what they're doing is not okay. And this is really important in terms of standing up for oneself. That's not okay. Ask for what you want to have happen. This is one that as an adult, I still have trouble with. So it might not be okay what they're doing, but I'm not willing to tell them what I want, right? And this is actually boundary work as well, right? So we need to be able to say, hey, you're not loving me right now. You're certainly not loving me. I need you to do it in this way specifically so that they know what to do. Because if you're going to hold them accountable, you have to be able to show them exactly the way that you would like it to be done so that then they can choose to do it or not do it. All right. And then when you ask for what you want to have happen, you have to then give space for the other person to do it. And they may choose to not do it. They may choose to actually get worse. And if that happens, then those are the two F's. So find somebody else to spend your time with, to play with, right? But sometimes you can't really handle these things by yourself. And so the next one would be find a grown-up if you're a kid situation. And also knowing that this doesn't always work, right? And so this is why parents need to get involved sometimes in order to give our kids these tools. So there's certainly school situations or outside the home situations where they do a really good job of mediating conflict. But a lot of times there's no protocol and there's no thing that clicks in to mediate conflict. They kind of just like, oh, it's part of childhood, right? I remember when my oldest was in first grade, he was at a really large school where the teachers were saying, oh, we love 10-minute recess. 10-minute recess is awesome because it doesn't allow the kids to get into any fights, right? And that is true. However, that's not really good for their overall development because you need to have the conflict and you need to be able to work through it and you need tools to do it. And a lot of times our kids aren't getting this training in schools. And so it's up to us as parents to be able to say, hey, if you're not getting what you need from a situation, do this STAFF acronym. Or, hey, if you're in a situation where you hurt somebody else, use this OUT acronym, because using these acronyms gives a lot of freedom for the people who are using them. and a lot of this power back in this power dynamic. Okay, so now that we know how to scaffold these experiences, we need to create space for it to work. So there's 4 main ways that we can create space for these things to work. And I'm going to go kind of into each of them. So like that 10-minute recess, it's not enough time to practice these things. So we need to be able to have way more frequent free play. And free play meaning like mature play opportunities. So things that you can really get in there and creatively come up with small towns that have really dynamic roles that are played again and again. So you need to be able to have giant chunks of time that are set aside to explore these social dynamics with other kids for your children. And this takes time, and also the first couple times, it'll be hard, especially if kids aren't used to doing free plays. That's not like coach directed, it's not video game directed, it's not toy directed even, so it's not like playing Sorry together or something like a board game, but it's actually like free play. And so when you're starting your child on free play, I would say do this kind of like ramping up. I wouldn't go ahead and just give your 6-year-old a half an hour of like unmediated free play with another kid or a couple kids and expect it to go well. So you might want to ramp up. So give 10 minutes and then the next time give 15 and then 17. So kind of going up and up, because as they start to do this, they will get better at it too. And in the first couple times, probably most times, if your children are younger, you're still going to have to come in and provide structural support, and you might leave. And with the free play, you can start in the beginning with kids who have never done it before, helping them set up the structure for free play. So you might build a giant blanket tent for them and then let them play in it and give them a bunch of clothespins and extra sheets and say, you can create whatever else you want. But you're allowing them to start from a starting place that creativity and this free play can really come. All right. Space can be reflection. So reflection is something that we don't do very well as a society. So we are constantly going from one thing to another thing to another thing, and we don't sit with ourselves. We don't sit with the heaviness of what it feels like to have just made a bad decision. We don't sit with what it feels like when we're being mean. We fill it up. We call somebody and talk to them on the phone. We turn on the TV. We get on Instagram. We do anything to not have to sit with the way that our guts feel sometimes. So we definitely run from emotions as a society. And so teaching our kids to be able to make these quiet spaces is really important. So in order to scaffold reflection, this mindfulness, there's 2 ways that you can do it that actually use words. So I think as parents, we're like, if I just give my kid 5 minutes, they're going to be like, playing in the corner. And so if you want to direct this, scaffold this kind of mindfulness or this reflection, these are the 2 things that I would ask your child. So I would ask the child first to observe what she sees and what she notices about a situation. And notice that this is the same thing that I said that we as parents should do. Just be aware. What do you notice? All right. And you could talk about it. So you could talk about this peach incident. So you could focus and you could say, I saw that this happened with this peach and I saw your face drop. So you looked very upset, something like that. All right. So the second thing is ask a child to reflect on how those observations apply to herself, to others, to the world, and to, in this step, maybe think a little forward. How would this impact her behavior in the future? How might it impact his behavior in the future? So the reflection really is just this observation without any kind of like valuation. What does it mean or anything? The second part of it, after the observation is over, is really making connections to the rest of your world and how that could influence your trajectory. All right, space means freedom to make decisions. So this is where we need to step back and we need to allow our kids to make sometimes really, really bad decisions in conflict situations. And there was a situation that I had where both of my daughters had pet bunnies and one died. And this was a really traumatic event. And it was, as a parent, really hard to watch my one daughter feel just absolutely gutted because she lost her bunny. But it also was hard to watch the reaction of the other one who still had an alive bunny, and how she felt about, like, how is she going to interact with this, right? And what you see in conflict situations like this is it bleeds over into the next thing that happens in your kids' lives. So, we have a bunny situation, and then right up next we have a, that's my ball. No, that's my ball. Give me my ball. No, you give me my ball. And so our kids are going from these giant situations, these little situations, and they are transferring these giant feelings that they have about these big things to the little things that are, whose ball is it, right? Is it a ball, or is it like standing for the bunny, right? I don't know. And as a parent, I can't say, well, you still have an alive bunny and now you took the ball, you give it to her right now. Can't you see she's hurting? I can't do it, right? But what I can do is I can say, you know what? It's her decision. She's going to do what she's going to do. And then not make commentary, not say, but I know she's a kind girl and I know she's going to share it with you because that's how I raised her. Can't say that, right? That's pressure. That's manipulation. So you just need to let the space, you know what? It is her ball. And so, she can just kind of sit with it. And then we did. Like in that situation, we sat with that in the car for like 10 minutes. And you know what? She ended up giving it to her, kind of in like an offhand way, but she did it. And I didn't make her do it. And like, that was like, oh, she did that and it made things better. But you know what? She might not have. And if she kept the ball, then in, a day or so, I might bring it up and I might say, hey, you want to talk about that? It seemed like that ball was really important to you. She was also in pain. Like, let's talk about how this felt for everybody. And this is the second one on here. So space means not just the freedom to make your own decisions as a kid, but also the power can shift. So if you're clutching the ball that everybody else wants, you have all the power, right? And to give that power away, you have to be really strong inside. You have to understand what's relevant, what's important, and you have to be able to give. Like if I had forced her to give that ball over, there wouldn't have been any empathy growth there at all. And you know what? It wouldn't have meant anything, and it would have made even more conflict because I'm manipulating that situation. But when she sits with it and she reflects, and I'm not guiding this reflection, she's just sitting with it, the power there shifts. She was able to give her power to somebody else because no one made her do it. It was a gift. And she pivoted. So there was room for her, in the absence of my commentary, to actually make a different decision. And I think that's really important, because if someone is narrating your own personal journey through like a conflict situation, sometimes you're not going to pivot. If the narration's there, you're going to follow what the narration says. So it's really important for us to back up, come in later after the situation, and to discuss it. Okay, so good news for these, the empathy, the creativity, the self-control. You can see in that last example with the ball clutching after the bunny died, all these things are coming into play. The self-control, what do I want versus what does someone else want? The creativity, how can I make things better? And the empathy here is perhaps the most important of these, but I think it's really important to understand that if you don't teach creative processing, then you won't be able to be empathetic cognitively, because you won't be able to imagine somebody else's experience. And I think that it's also really important for empathy to understand that empathy is not what you would feel if you were in someone else's position. That's almost like the opposite of empathy. That's inserting yourself into their world, and that's not welcome. So what you need to do is to try to figure out how you would feel if you were them in their circumstances, not bringing your own garbage and your own past and your own strengths and weaknesses into that situation, not relating it back to a similar experience that you had when you were in college, but instead actually, if you were them, how would they feel, right? It's a hard thing to do, to take self out of the equation. And I've found that with everything that's going on in our world today, with the pandemic and this new found racial awareness of the discrimination that's been going on in our society for so long, it's really important to teach kids to listen and to learn to listen ourselves. So not just being kind, not just being aware, but this skill of listening and actually being open to shifting your own inner ideas. That reflection comes in really, really in a powerful way there as well. So these things, all three, can be taught. And then, as I said before, we're working towards this idea of self-regulation. I want to give you guys a resource. So the Greater Good in Action website, so this is a nonprofit that's centered at Berkeley, and they have a lot of really neat science-based tools that you can use. And if you go on their website, they have how to cultivate happiness, how to cultivate compassion, how to cultivate empathy. And this one, active listening here, I would really recommend to do, because when we listen, a lot of times we are comparing what the person says to what we already know to be true. And that's not really listening. That's just waiting until they're done so that you can say what's the truth, right? So this active listening, I think, is really an important skill that we can use with our kids. And a lot of these empathy skills, really, we model and they learn. That's the easiest way to bring awareness and attention to them, is just do them yourself. And I learned through writing this book that as I'm trying to cultivate these skills in my kids, the first thing I have to do is cultivate them in myself. So here's some examples of all of these different things. They have casual, moderate, or intensity in terms of like how much time it takes. And I would try to do some of these exercises in your family or with yourself, and keep the ones that you feel like work, and then discard the ones that you feel like don't work. So here's more information if you are interested in learning more about the book, or I have on YouTube, I have a series of parenting, like 5-minute things that follow the neural basis of behavior class that I teach at UVA, so that if you're interested in real neuroanatomy and how we work the neural basis of behavior, you can watch those if you ever have 5 minutes. Or if you're interested in a certain thing like sex hormones or like emotions, there's 2 that are on emotions that might be a good listen after listening to me for this hour. So I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. And if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Erin. This is awesome. So nothing came through the Q&A while you were talking. But does anybody have any questions right now that you guys can go ahead and type in? If you want me to unmute you, you can hit that little raise your hand button at the bottom as well. And you can ask the question live. Or just type it in. I guess you just covered everything so well.
It was a lot for sure.
I think it also, sometimes takes some time to process everything. So I can definitely see where, like I had things that I was trying to think of as we were going, but there is a lot. All right, we have somebody who's raising their hand, so I'm going to hit the loud talk button. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just have a small question. I always wonder, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy or compassion? And it just means compassion, and sympathy just means you feel it, you think it, but you do not do action. Is that the difference?
Yeah, so there are actually about 10 different definitions for what some people would call empathy. So things like it's like a mimicry, a transpathy, sympathy would be in there with them. So they tend to get divided up by the amount of differentiation between yourself and the other person. So something like sympathy would be more that, you're not acting, but you feel for the other person. And I think compassion is typically known as like an action, whereas empathy, we think about in terms of this thought process. And I think in society, the sympathy is thought of as more of the emotional empathy. The empathy is like cognitive empathy, and then the applied empathy is like compassion, is typically the way that I would do, like break it up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That was a great question. Somebody also asked in the chat if the slides will be available later, and I told that person that all of this whole recording will be on our YouTube channel, the JMRL YouTube channel, and the previous session on creativity is also there. And the first session that we did prior to setting up the last 3 sessions, that is kind of an all-encompassing view of parenting with neuroscience that incorporates all self-control, empathy, and creativity, is actually available on Erin's YouTube channel, which I'll email out the link to that with the link to this one as well when it comes out. And I will email you guys all separately when this is up on our YouTube channel, so you guys have it sent to your inbox.
And so we have one more 2 weeks from today on self-control, and that will be the last of the 3 pillars, if anybody wants to come to that as well.
Yeah, you can already register for that. That is on our website. And I will let you know that in addition to being able to buy Erin's Second Nature book that she wrote that has all this information and a lot more, we also do have it as an ebook that you can download, and we have it on as a print book through the library as well. And
it's on Audible as well. If anybody has an Audible subscription, they can check.
Love Audible. Well, I love
everything and Audible go together for sure.
Yeah, I guess I love audiobooks. Since we have audiobooks through the library too. I would love to be able to get this on audiobook through the library, but it's not there yet. So just FYI. Yeah.
And it's me, so you get to listen to lots of me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you guys so much for coming. It was lovely to be able to talk to you this morning.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, Teresa, did you have another question, or is that from before?
Yeah, sometimes when I just in daily parenting, I also just feel a little frustrated. Sometimes when kids have some conflicts with other kids, I don't know if I need to just ask her to go to apologize and own the action and do something, or just let herself do it. Just step by.
Yeah. So how old is she?
10.
So what I would say is that you want to set up expectations for what you'd like them to do. And so you need to walk them through this structure, no matter how old they are, a couple times. So it doesn't matter if your child is 3 or if they're 16. If this is the way you've chosen to do conflict resolution with them, they'll learn it very quickly. And so you need to provide the structure for them the first couple times. After the first couple times, a 10-year-old should be able to do it when you ask, but she might not organically just do it by herself. She might still need prompting. And in that situation, I would say, if there's a conflict and you feel like this needs to happen, I would tell her that she needs to make this right before she kind of re-enters into the day with the rest of the family. So you want to make it a priority to resolve the conflict without just going on to the next thing and having it be in between you guys and not be spoken about.
Okay, thank you. And another question is that sometimes I think my daughter just, she just told me, I just don't like this boy. I just don't want to play with him because he always, for example, eat my food without my permission or something like that. I don't know how to deal with this situation.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I think we all have that boy who stabs food off our plate without our permission. And even if we're an adult, right? So this is a really great opportunity to teach her, how do you handle people who do things that you don't like in a way that's kind And so I say I would probably teach her that staff. So tell him that you don't like it, like say how you feel about it, and then ask for what you want to have happen. And then if he can't do what she's asking, then she can put a boundary there that says that she doesn't want to play with him. Right? And if it's a scary person and she can't do that, then it's also okay for her just to not want to be around him. You know, it's problematic if she's in a situation where she has to be around him, right? So like if she is being watched after school by somebody who also has him, you guys might need to be creative. But I would say telling her first that what she wants is fine to want. She doesn't want someone to stab food off her plate. And to make sure she's told him that. And then if she has told him that and he still hasn't responded, she can act, you know, she can say, I don't want to play with you. And like parents need to respect that. Like she's setting a boundary. And as long as she does it in a kind way, we probably should be supportive with her.
Yeah, I just have this situation, just one neighbor, the boy, and then third neighbor. The parent just said, it's not right for your daughter to just isolate the boy. I don't know. Sometimes I feel frustrated. I ask my girl to, you should play with this boy, but she just said, I don't like him. So is it okay for kids just to have her likings when making friends?
Well, I mean, we do. Like as adults, we have, you know, we're drawn to certain people and other people don't. And I think that it is important to not make people do things that they've clearly said make them feel bad. It's hard if they cannot articulate why, because as parents, we don't understand. But I do think that at 10, if someone clearly says that they feel uncomfortable in a situation, that we should listen. Now, that doesn't mean that she'll never have to do it. But I think that we should ask her to come up with situations that might be better for her. So maybe say, I don't see a way that you can never see him again. How would being around him be better? What can we do to change the dynamics? What if instead of playing one-on-one, you had another person there? What if there was always an adult there? So allow her to kind of generate something that she would feel comfortable with if she still has to be in that situation. Other parents can be hard to deal with when, you know, sometimes they want you to bowl over what your kid is asking for because it's opposite of what their child is asking for. And that can be hard to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Does anybody else have a question before we head out for the day? All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions for Erin at a later date, you saw her website is on there and you can find, there's a contact information there as well. You can also ask, send me any questions that are library related and I'll get to those. Or if you have a question that you want me to forward on to Erin, I can do that too. So,
thank you guys.
Yeah.